Sarah Thompson arrived at the military base early in the morning, the cold wind biting at her face. She had trained for years to be a medic, spending endless hours learning about trauma care, emergency treatment, and battlefield medicine. Today, however, she felt a different kind of tension. Not the usual nervousness before a mission, but the weight of doubt from those around her. She was about to take part in a high-stakes training exercise, one designed to simulate real combat situations, and the soldiers she would be working with didn't see her as an equal. As Sarah walked toward the training grounds, she noticed the side glances, the quiet smirks, and the whispered conversations. A few of the new recruits laughed openly as she passed, making jokes about her role. "Here comes just a medic," one of them said, loud enough for others to hear. "Hope she brought her bandages." Another soldier muttered something about medics not doing real fighting, that their job was just to stay behind and patch people up while the real soldiers faced danger. Sarah felt a familiar sting, but she ignored it, focusing on the mission ahead. She had heard it before. People doubting her because of her uniform, her role, or her gender. But she had learned long ago that proving them wrong required patience, skill, and courage. The training ground was buzzing with activity. Explosions simulated in the distance, soldiers running, shouting commands, and vehicles moving in precise formations. Sarah's task was simple on paper: provide medical support to anyone who got injured during the exercise. But she knew better than anyone that simple on paper didn't mean simple in reality. She tightened the straps on her gear, checked her medical kit one last time, and moved toward her assigned post. Almost immediately, some of the soldiers started testing her. One of the older rookies, a tall man with a cocky smile, walked up to her and said, "Hey Thompson, are you sure you can handle this? Don't get in anyone's way." His tone was mocking, and several others laughed. Sarah forced a polite smile. "Just stay focused on your own tasks," she replied calmly, hiding the irritation that bubbled beneath. She knew any display of anger or frustration would only feed their perception of her as weak or inexperienced. As the exercise progressed, Sarah observed the chaos of a simulated battlefield. Soldiers were rushing to positions, shouting into radios, and responding to fake explosions and gunfire. She noticed small injuries almost immediately: cuts from shrapnel, bruises from falls, and minor burns from simulated fire. She moved swiftly, applying first aid, bandaging wounds, and calming the injured soldiers. Despite her efficiency, a few of the soldiers continued to whisper and joke, questioning her ability to handle a real emergency. One of the commanders, a grizzled veteran who had seen countless real missions, glanced at her with a raised eyebrow. He didn't say much, but the doubt was clear in his eyes. Sarah felt the weight of their skepticism like a physical force pressing down on her. But instead of being discouraged, it fueled her determination. She had trained for moments like this, moments when quick thinking, calm nerves, and precise action could save lives. She reminded herself silently. One day, they would see that she was more than just a medic. The tension reached a subtle climax when one of the recruits pretended to be injured in front of her. He fell to the ground dramatically, groaning loudly. Several of his friends snickered, as if testing whether she would panic or fail. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't falter. She rushed over, assessed his condition quickly, and began her treatment. Even though it was a test, she treated it with the same seriousness she would any real injury. The boy's expression changed from mockery to surprise as she worked efficiently and confidently, showing skills he hadn't expected her to have. By mid-morning, Sarah had begun to earn quiet respect from some of the onlookers, though many still doubted her. They whispered among themselves, some acknowledging her competence in hushed tones, while others still clung to their prejudices. Sarah remained focused, knowing that the real test wasn't their approval. It was being ready for the moment when the stakes would truly be life or death. She continued moving through the training ground, checking on the wounded, keeping track of medical supplies, and maintaining calm under pressure. Even in these early hours, a pattern was emerging. While others mocked her, she stayed composed, precise, and dependable. She wasn't trying to prove anything in the moment. She was preparing for the day when the real challenge would come, when those who laughed at her would witness courage and skill in action. She had learned that patience and preparation were more powerful than words or insults. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Sarah's resolve hardened. The whispers, jokes, and mockery faded into the background of her mind. She knew that the real measure of her strength wouldn't come from proving others wrong in small moments, but from rising to the challenge when danger arrived, and she was ready. The morning grew hotter as the training exercise intensified. Sarah Thompson moved steadily through the chaos, her medical kit securely fastened to her side. Though the explosions and shouts were simulated, the tension in the air felt real. Soldiers ran past her, shouting coordinates and giving commands, their faces set in determined expressions. Some glanced at her with doubt, others barely noticed her at all. She had grown used to being underestimated, but she didn't let it slow her down. Every injury, every small crisis was an opportunity to stay ready, and she treated it with the seriousness it deserved. At first, her tasks seemed simple. A few minor cuts from fake shrapnel here, a sprained ankle there. She moved quickly, applying bandages, stabilizing limbs, and keeping everyone calm. But even these small acts were met with whispers and laughter from some of the recruits. "Why bother? She's just a medic," one muttered. Another laughed, saying, "What's she going to do in a real fight? Hand out stickers." Sarah ignored them, focusing on her patience, knowing that skill and composure mattered far more than words. Some of the soldiers, still convinced that she was incapable, decided to test her further. One of the younger recruits intentionally staged a dramatic fall, rolling on the ground and screaming loudly as if he were gravely injured. His friends gathered around, smirking, eager to see her panic or falter. But Sarah didn't flinch. She rushed to his side, quickly scanning for injuries, checking his pulse, and assessing his breathing. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she applied a tourniquet and stabilized his arm. The boy's wide-eyed surprise told her everything. He hadn't expected her to be capable, and now he realized she was more than he imagined. Despite these small victories, the atmosphere remained tense. Sarah could sense the lingering skepticism from the more experienced soldiers and the commander watching from a distance. They weren't trying to hurt her. They simply couldn't reconcile their assumptions with what they were seeing. Medics don't handle real combat, they thought. But Sarah's quiet confidence challenged that belief without a single word. Every action, every calm decision in the middle of chaos spoke louder than any argument could. The first real test came unexpectedly. During a simulated ambush, one of the instructors detonated a smoke device near Sarah's position. Thick, choking clouds rolled across the training ground, making it almost impossible to see. Panic rippled among the soldiers, some stumbling, others freezing in fear. Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved carefully but swiftly, navigating through the smoke toward a group of injured soldiers who were trapped behind obstacles. Her senses sharpened, every step calculated, her training guiding her through the confusion. She reached the first soldier, a young recruit who had tripped over debris. His leg was injured, and he clutched it, moaning dramatically. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands steady. She checked his pulse, applied a bandage, and gave him instructions to stay calm. The boy's friends watched in stunned silence, realizing that Sarah's calm presence and efficiency were nothing like the mockery they had expected. Even the grizzled veterans began to take notice. As the exercise progressed, the situations grew more complex. Another soldier fell from a simulated vehicle accident, and Sarah was the first to respond. She lifted him carefully, stabilized his neck and back, and coordinated with other medics to carry him to a safe zone. All the while, the soldiers who had doubted her looked on, slowly realizing that her role was far from passive. She wasn't just treating injuries. She was orchestrating solutions, making split-second decisions under pressure, and keeping everyone alive in the chaos. Even small actions carried weight. Sarah noticed a recruit panicking near a smoke grenade. Without hesitation, she grabbed his arm and guided him to safety, her voice calm but firm. "Stay with me. You're going to be okay," she said. That simple statement carried authority, and for the first time, some of the soldiers truly began to respect her. The words didn't just reassure, they demonstrated leadership. By midday, the atmosphere had shifted subtly. The soldiers who had once mocked her were quieter now, some exchanging surprised glances. Even the commander, who had initially raised an eyebrow at her presence, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. Sarah didn't seek praise, but she could feel the shift. The early whispers of doubt were fading, replaced by a growing awareness that she could handle situations many had assumed were beyond her capability. Despite this progress, Sarah knew the real challenge had not yet arrived. The simulated injuries had grown more complex, the obstacles more dangerous, and the stakes higher. She continued moving through the battlefield, ready for whatever the next crisis would bring. Every patient she treated, every calm decision she made, was a step toward proving that a medic could be just as courageous and decisive as any soldier. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah paused briefly to catch her breath, surveying the battlefield. The chaos still raged around her, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had survived the first round of tests, showing skill, courage, and composure in the face of mockery and doubt. And deep down, she knew that the true test, the one that would truly prove her worth, was still ahead. But she was ready. Every whispered joke, every skeptical glance had only made her more determined. When the real danger came, she would be prepared to rise above it, and no one's mockery could stop her. The calm focus Sarah had maintained through the morning was suddenly shattered. What had been a controlled training exercise quickly escalated into chaos. A simulated explosion, louder and more intense than anything they had encountered so far, ripped through the training ground. Smoke and dust filled the air, making it almost impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The loud shouts of the soldiers turned into a mixture of panic and confusion. The carefully planned drills now felt like a real battlefield. Sarah's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. Years of training kicked in automatically, and her mind sharpened to every detail around her. She could see soldiers sprawled across the ground, some injured from the simulation, others frozen with shock. Even the commander, a man she had always respected but who had quietly doubted her abilities, was trapped under a piece of debris, shouting for help. Around her, the soldiers who had mocked her in the morning hesitated, unsure what to do in the chaos. Fear had frozen them in place. Without a moment's pause, Sarah sprang into action. She moved through the thick smoke, using her hands to feel her way and her ears to detect cries for help. She reached the first injured soldier, a young recruit whose leg was pinned under a fallen training structure. The boy was in pain, his face pale under the dust and sweat. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice calm but authoritative. "I've got you. We're going to get you out safely," she said. She carefully assessed his injury, adjusted his position to avoid further harm, and signaled to nearby soldiers to help lift the debris. Her confidence and quick thinking immediately gave him reassurance he didn't know he needed. Then she turned toward the commander. He was struggling, pinned under heavy timber, and panic was visible in his eyes. Normally, someone else would have taken charge, but in that moment, Sarah realized that the situation demanded immediate action, and no one else was stepping forward. Ignoring the danger of smoke and falling debris, she crawled toward him. With strength and precision, she lifted part of the timber while directing others to help. Together, they freed the commander, but the smoke and simulated flames made it clear the danger was far from over. The chaos intensified. Another explosion, this time closer, sent a shower of debris and sparks across the field. Soldiers scattered in all directions, some yelling instructions, others calling for help. Sarah, however, stayed focused. She knew that panicking would only worsen the situation. She began organizing the wounded, prioritizing those most in danger, and coordinating with anyone who would follow her lead. Her hands moved quickly, her mind calculating which injuries needed immediate attention and which soldiers could move safely on their own. Even the soldiers who had mocked her earlier were forced to notice her skill. They watched as Sarah moved calmly and decisively, seemingly in control of the chaos. She lifted an injured soldier onto her shoulders, navigated through smoke-filled corridors of debris, and directed others to safer ground. Each action was precise, efficient, and life-saving. It became clear to everyone watching that she was no ordinary medic. She was a force to be reckoned with in the heat of the moment. As she worked, Sarah noticed the commander struggling to remain upright, still shaken from being trapped. She positioned herself behind him, supporting his weight while directing others to clear a safe path through the burning field. The commander, normally proud and unshakable, looked at her in awe and surprise. For the first time, he saw Sarah not as just a medic, but as a leader capable of taking charge in life-or-death situations. Smoke stung her eyes, and the heat of the simulated fire pressed against her skin, but she refused to back down. Every second counted. Sarah's training had prepared her for emergencies, but this level of intensity was something few had truly faced. She relied on her instincts, her knowledge of first aid, and her ability to stay calm under pressure. Her mind moved faster than the chaos around her, calculating risks, prioritizing actions, and maintaining a level of control that inspired those nearby. The injured soldiers responded to her calm presence. Even those who had been frightened or panicked followed her instructions without hesitation. She checked pulses, applied bandages, stabilized limbs, and ensured everyone was moving towards safety. Her confidence was contagious, spreading quickly among the group. Soldiers who had been mocking her in the morning now began to see her courage and skill in a completely new light. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the commander and the wounded were guided to safety. The smoke began to clear, and the chaos of the exercise slowed down. Soldiers took a moment to catch their breath, and the commander, still shaken but unharmed, looked directly at Sarah. His eyes reflected respect, disbelief, and gratitude all at once. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement that she had saved him from what could have been a serious accident. In that moment, the soldiers realized something important. The person they had dismissed as just a medic had not only kept her cool but had taken the lead, saved lives, and shown bravery that exceeded their expectations. Sarah had proven, without saying a word, that true courage and leadership were not determined by rank, gender, or role. She had acted decisively when it mattered most, and everyone who witnessed it knew that the day's lesson went far beyond a training exercise. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Sarah finally allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had survived the crisis, kept others safe, and shown her true abilities. But she knew that this was only the beginning. The respect she had earned today would be tested again in the next challenges, and she was ready to rise to the occasion. The fire had spread faster than anyone anticipated. What had started as a controlled simulation now looked terrifyingly real. Flames licked at the edges of the training field, sending thick smoke into the sky. The noise of crackling fire mixed with shouted instructions and panicked cries, creating a chaotic symphony of confusion. Sarah Thompson felt the heat against her skin and knew that hesitation could be deadly. Every instinct she had trained for kicked in, and without a second thought, she moved toward the greatest danger. The commander was still in the center of the chaos, pinned under debris, coughing from the smoke. Soldiers around him froze, unsure how to act, their earlier bravado evaporating in the face of real danger. Some glanced at Sarah as if to ask for guidance. She didn't pause. Her mind was clear, her purpose simple. Get him out safely. She crouched, assessing the situation, weighing the weight of the debris and the safest path through the fire. With a deep breath, she grabbed the commander's arm and tugged, lifting him just enough to free his trapped shoulder. Sparks from the nearby flames flew past them, but Sarah stayed focused, moving methodically while keeping him calm. "I've got you," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the panic. "We're getting out together." The commander, normally so composed and commanding, looked at her with wide eyes. He had never imagined that a medic would risk herself so willingly in such danger. Sarah knew the path ahead was dangerous. Fallen logs, burning debris, and smoke-filled areas blocked the way. She carefully guided the commander, using her body to shield him from sparks and flames. Every step was calculated, balancing speed with caution. soldiers who had mocked her in the morning watched in stunned silence, realizing that this was no longer a drill. This was real courage in action. At one point, a small explosion from a simulated fire trap sent a shower of debris across the path. Sarah instinctively shielded the commander with her body, absorbing the impact of falling fragments herself. Pain shot through her shoulder, but she ignored it. Every second counted. She steadied him, whispered reassurances, and pressed forward. The surrounding soldiers, inspired by her bravery, began to move as well, following her lead without question. The heat intensified, and smoke stung her eyes, but Sarah refused to slow down. She thought only of the commander and the other injured soldiers around her. She lifted a fallen branch blocking the way and directed another recruit to move debris from the path. Her commands were calm but firm, a stark contrast to the panic that had overtaken the rest of the field. In that moment, she was not just a medic. She was a leader, a protector, someone who could guide others through danger when no one else dared. As they approached a clearer path, another soldier tripped and fell, crying out in pain. Sarah didn't hesitate. She sprinted to him, checked his condition, and quickly lifted him onto her shoulder. She adjusted her grip on the commander with her other hand, keeping him steady while making her way towards safety. It was an extraordinary display of strength, skill, and focus under extreme pressure. The soldiers who had laughed at her in the morning could only gape, their assumptions shattered by what they were witnessing. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Sarah led the commander and the injured soldiers to the edge of the fire zone. She ensured they were safe before collapsing briefly on the ground herself, her chest heaving. The smoke cleared enough for everyone to see the magnitude of what had just happened. The commander, shaken but unharmed, looked at her with awe and respect. He had underestimated her role and ability, and now it was painfully clear that his assumptions had been wrong. Around them, the soldiers who had doubted her earlier were silent. The mocking comments and jokes had vanished entirely, replaced by astonishment and admiration. They realized that Sarah had done what many of them could not have done. Face real danger calmly, take decisive action, and save lives. Her courage had changed everything, proving that heroism was not about rank, title, or gender. It was about skill, determination, and heart. Even as the fire began to be brought under control by instructors and safety teams, Sarah's mind stayed sharp. She continued checking on the injured, giving instructions to ensure no one was left behind, and maintaining calm in the aftermath of the chaos. Her presence had become the anchor in a storm of panic, and everyone around her could feel it. When the commander finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, "I don't think I've ever seen anyone handle danger the way you just did." His words were sincere, and for the first time the full weight of his respect was clear. Sarah simply nodded, exhausted but satisfied. She had not sought praise, she had only acted as she was trained to do, but the acknowledgement was meaningful. It was a recognition that her skills, bravery, and composure under fire were undeniable. As the soldiers slowly regrouped, the lesson of the day became clear. The woman they had dismissed as just a medic had led the way through smoke, fire, and danger, saving lives when it mattered most. Sarah had proven that courage comes from determination, not assumption, and that true leadership is shown in action, not rank. The fire had tested everyone, but it had also revealed a truth. Heroism often comes from the most unexpected places. After the chaos of the fire, the training ground was quiet except for the distant crackling of leftover flames and the soft murmur of soldiers recovering from the ordeal. The smoke still hung in the air, a reminder of the danger that had just passed. Sarah Thompson stood at the edge of the field, her uniform smudged with soot and sweat, her breathing heavy but steady. Around her, the soldiers who had doubted her in the morning were slowly regaining their composure. They had witnessed something they hadn't expected. A medic not just surviving a crisis but leading through it. The young recruits who had whispered jokes and mocked her earlier now watched with awe. Their expressions had changed from amusement to disbelief. They had underestimated her, thinking she would stand by quietly while others faced the danger. Instead, She had moved with precision, courage, and confidence, taking charge when everyone else had frozen. Even the more experienced soldiers, who had silently questioned her abilities, were now openly impressed. They whispered among themselves, sharing what they had seen. How she had guided the commander through fire, saved injured soldiers, and maintained control under pressure. Sarah herself was aware of their shifting perception, but she didn't let it distract her. She continued checking on every injured soldier, making sure no one had been overlooked. Her focus was on their well-being, not the praise she was beginning to receive. Yet, every action she took reinforced the realization in everyone's minds that she was more than just a medic. Her courage, skill, and leadership had turned what could have been a disaster into a story of survival and teamwork. The commander, still slightly shaken but unharmed, approached her with a new look of respect. His eyes, which had once carried doubt, now held admiration. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you saved my life today. I underestimated you, and I owe you an apology." His words were sincere, and Sarah nodded politely. She didn't need his approval, but it mattered that the person in command recognized her efforts. It was a subtle shift that symbolized a much larger change in the perception of her abilities. Other soldiers began to approach as well, some hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. They asked questions, wanting to understand her actions, and even offered thanks. One of the recruits who had been most vocal in mocking her came forward, face red with embarrassment. I didn't think you could do it," he admitted. Sarah smiled faintly, her calm demeanor never faltering. "I was trained for this," she said simply. "We all have our roles, and mine happens to include staying alive and keeping others alive, too." Her words were straightforward, but they carried authority. They reminded everyone that true ability cannot be judged by labels or titles. The mood on the field began to shift further as soldiers processed what had happened. The fire and smoke were gone, but the lesson lingered. They realized that courage and leadership aren't defined by appearance, role, or preconceived notions. They are defined by action in moments of crisis. Sarah had embodied that lesson fully. Her ability to stay calm under pressure, make quick decisions, and protect lives had rewritten the expectations of everyone around her. As the day wore on, instructors and senior officers arrived to assess the situation. They had witnessed the events unfold and were equally impressed. They praised Sarah for her quick thinking and ability to lead others through danger, recognizing that her skills went far beyond basic medical training. For the first time, the whispers of doubt and skepticism were replaced by acknowledgement and admiration. Sarah felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that her actions had spoken louder than words ever could. Throughout it all, Sarah remained humble. She continued tending to the injured, giving instructions to maintain safety, and ensuring the team was cohesive. She understood that respect is earned through consistent action, not temporary heroics. Yet she could feel the change in energy around her. The soldiers who had mocked her were now paying attention, following her guidance, and beginning to see her as a leader. The fire had revealed more than just her courage. It had also revealed her strategic thinking and ability to inspire others under stress. Soldiers began to imitate her calm tone when giving instructions, started paying attention to her signals, and even deferred to her judgment when making quick decisions. The dynamic of the team had shifted subtly but irrevocably. Sarah had broken the invisible barrier that labels and stereotypes often create. She had shown that real influence comes from action and integrity, not rank or reputation. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped low over the training grounds, the soldiers gathered to debrief. The atmosphere was different now. Muted respect had replaced mockery, and admiration had replaced doubt. They discussed the fire, the injuries, and the rapid responses, but more importantly, they discussed Sarah's role in it all. She had been calm when others panicked, decisive when others hesitated, and courageous when fear threatened to take over. As Sarah walked away from the training ground that evening, her uniform scorched and dusty, she reflected on the day. The experience had been more than a test of her skills. It had been a test of character. She had faced danger, helped others, and proven herself without seeking approval. She understood that people's perceptions might take longer to change than their actions, but for now, she had earned a place of respect among those who had once doubted her. She had broken stereotypes, saved lives, and shown that being just a medic could mean being extraordinary when it mattered most. The day after the fire, the base was calm, almost eerily quiet compared to the chaos that had erupted just 24 hours earlier. Sarah Thompson walked through the training grounds, her boots crunching on the gravel, and thought about the events of the previous day. Though the fire had been a simulated exercise, it had tested her in ways no ordinary training could. Every decision, every movement, every risk she had taken to save the commander and her fellow soldiers had felt real. She had acted without hesitation, guided only by her training and determination. Now, in the aftermath, she finally had a moment to reflect. The soldiers who had mocked her, whispered about her, and doubted her abilities were no longer joking. In the briefings and casual conversations, their voices carried a new tone: respect, admiration, and even a hint of awe. Some of the recruits she had once thought would never acknowledge her now approached her, asking questions about how she had handled certain moments, how she had stayed calm when everyone else panicked, and how she had managed to lead under such pressure. Sarah answered their questions quietly, without boasting, focusing instead on explaining her thought process, the techniques she had used, and the importance of preparation. The commander, who had been trapped under debris and depended entirely on her courage, approached her again. His face was still marked by the strain of the incident, but his eyes held genuine respect. "Lieutenant Thompson," he said, "I've seen a lot in my career, but I've never witnessed anyone handle a crisis like you did. You didn't just save me, you saved the entire team. I misjudged you, and I owe you more than just words." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology with quiet dignity. She had never sought recognition, but hearing the commander's words reinforced a truth she already knew. Her training, courage, and calmness under pressure were what mattered most. Later that morning, the higher command held a formal debriefing. Sarah was called forward to recount her actions during the exercise. She described the sequence of events, the explosions, the smoke, the trapped soldiers, and how she had prioritized tasks while keeping herself and others safe. She spoke calmly, with clarity and focus, and even the most skeptical officers could not deny her skill and leadership. By the time she finished, it was clear to everyone present that Sarah had gone above and beyond what was expected of her. She had not only performed her duties as a medic, but had demonstrated courage and decisiveness that rivaled anyone on the battlefield. Commendations followed. Sarah was recognized officially for her bravery, quick thinking, and leadership under pressure. Though the ceremony was brief, the respect in the room was palpable. Colleagues who had once ignored or belittled her now congratulated her sincerely. Even the recruits who had been most vocal in their mockery shook her hand with humility, admitting that they had been wrong to doubt her. For Sarah, the recognition was meaningful, but the deeper reward came from knowing she had proven herself in the most challenging circumstances. In the following days, Sarah reflected on what had happened. She thought about how easy it had been for people to underestimate her, simply because of her role as a medic. She considered the biases and stereotypes she had faced, and how those assumptions had almost affected the way the soldiers acted during the crisis. The incident had been a harsh lesson for everyone, but it also became a turning point. It showed that courage and capability are not dictated by rank, gender, or job title. They are revealed in action. Sarah also thought about her own growth. The fire and the chaos had tested her limits, pushing her physically, mentally, and emotionally. She realized that she had become more confident in her abilities and more capable of handling emergencies under extreme pressure. She had learned to trust her instincts even when others were panicking, to take initiative without waiting for approval, and to lead quietly but effectively. These lessons would stay with her, shaping her future actions both in training and in real-life missions. The soldiers around her also began to change. The unit's culture shifted subtly but significantly. The teasing and mockery of medics lessened, replaced by acknowledgement of their value and respect for their skills. Young recruits who once looked at Sarah with doubt now looked at her with admiration. They saw that true leadership could come from unexpected places and that courage was measured not by titles but by actions. Sarah's example had become a model, showing that anyone willing to act with skill and bravery could command respect. By the end of the week, Sarah felt a quiet pride. She hadn't sought recognition, but she had earned it. More importantly, she had shown that perseverance, preparation, and courage could overcome prejudice and doubt. The fire had been more than a test of skill, it had been a test of character. She had faced danger head-on, saved lives, and inspired those around her. And she knew that the lessons from that day would stay with her and the unit for years to come. As she walked across the training ground one last time that week, Sarah understood that her role as a medic didn't limit her, it defined her in the best way possible. She had the skills to save lives, the courage to face danger, and the determination to act when others hesitated. In that moment, she realized that the respect she had earned was not just for her actions during the fire, but for her consistent dedication, professionalism, and bravery. She had not only changed how others saw her, but she had also strengthened the team and shown that anyone could rise above expectations if they trusted themselves and stayed true to their training. The days following the fire were a mixture of calm reflection and quiet admiration at the base. The event had left a lasting impression, not just on Sarah Thompson, but on everyone who had witnessed it. Soldiers walked a little taller, their attitudes subtly shifted, and conversations that had once included jokes at Sarah's expense now carried respect and acknowledgement of her skill. Her actions during the crisis had become a story everyone retold, not in a boastful way, but as an example of courage, quick thinking, and leadership. Sarah herself focused on returning to her routine, ensuring that injured soldiers were fully recovered from the training exercise and that supplies were replenished. Despite the recognition she had received, she remained grounded. She knew that respect is not given permanently, it is earned again and again through consistent action and professionalism. Yet, she couldn't ignore the small, meaningful changes around her. The soldiers who had mocked her were now coming to her for advice, guidance, and even reassurance. They asked questions about techniques she had used, about strategies for remaining calm under pressure, and about how to prepare for emergencies in a way that could save lives. Sarah answered patiently, aware that these were teachable moments. The commander, who had once doubted her abilities, now treated her differently. He consulted her on strategy, sought her input during planning, and acknowledged her insights in front of others. This was not merely a shift in behavior, it was a recognition of her leadership, born not out of formality, but from action. The same soldiers who had whispered and laughed at her now watched carefully as she moved among the teams, noting how her calm presence brought order to situations that might otherwise spiral into chaos. The base leadership also took notice. Reports of her heroism during the exercise reached higher command, and Sarah was formally commended in writing for her bravery, composure, and decisive actions. The commendation noted that her performance went beyond expectations for her role as a medic and had significantly contributed to the safety and morale of the unit. While the acknowledgement pleased her, Sarah remained more focused on the lessons the team had learned. She knew that the true impact of her actions went far beyond the paperwork. It was in the change of attitude, the growth of confidence, and the newfound respect her colleagues had for her. Some of the younger recruits who had been particularly dismissive began to look at her differently. They started to realize that their assumptions had been unfair and that courage, skill, and leadership were not dictated by gender, rank, or role. A few of them even approached Sarah with quiet humility, asking for advice on training techniques and strategies for staying calm during emergencies. She responded with patience, teaching them not just the practical skills of medicine, but also the mental strength required to remain composed in life-or-death situations. In doing so, she became a mentor to many, a guide who had earned her position through action rather than authority. The story of the fire and Sarah's heroism also spread informally among the wider base. Soldiers who were not present during the exercise heard about how the medic had dragged the commander through flames, how she had stabilized injured soldiers under extreme conditions, and how she had maintained calm when others were frozen with fear. Her actions became an example in discussions about leadership, courage, and teamwork. She had demonstrated that respect is not something demanded, it is earned, often in moments of extreme challenge. Sarah reflected privately on what had happened. She realized that the mockery she had faced in the past was not unique, and that many people make assumptions based on appearances or roles. But she also understood that moments of crisis reveal true character and capability. By rising to the challenge, she had not only proven her own abilities, but had also helped to reshape the culture of her unit. Stereotypes that had once seemed fixed were now being questioned, and she had become a living example of how actions define a person far more than words or assumptions. The impact extended beyond immediate respect. Sarah noticed that her colleagues were more willing to communicate openly, to trust in each other's abilities, and to work as a cohesive team. Fear and doubt had been replaced by confidence and cooperation. In small ways, through conversations, teamwork exercises, and shared responsibilities, the lessons from the fire were embedded into the daily life of the base. Sarah's courage had become a catalyst for change, inspiring others to take initiative, stay calm under pressure, and look beyond superficial judgments. Even as she returned to her routine duties, Sarah understood that this experience would stay with her and her colleagues for years to come. The fire had tested everyone, but it had also shown the value of preparation, quick thinking, and bravery. She had faced danger head-on, saved lives, and changed the perception of those around her. The respect she had earned was real and lasting, not simply because of her actions during the fire, but because of the integrity, skill, and courage she consistently demonstrated. By the end of the week, Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction. The team had survived, grown stronger, and learned important lessons about leadership and trust. She had proven that being just a medic did not limit her. It amplified her ability to act decisively and inspire others. Her story had become part of the unit's culture, a reminder that heroism is not about titles or appearances, but about courage, action, and the willingness to step forward when it matters most. And as she prepared for the next mission, Sarah knew that the lessons of the fire, both for herself and for her team, would guide every challenge they faced in the future. Months had passed since the fire on the training grounds, but the memory of that day remained vivid for everyone who had witnessed it. Sarah Thompson, once underestimated and mocked as just a medic, had now become a symbol of courage, skill, and quiet leadership within her unit. The respect she had earned was no longer tentative or whispered. It was genuine, solid, and enduring. The soldiers who had once doubted her now looked to her as an example, a guide, and in many ways, a mentor. Sarah continued her work with the same dedication as before. She treated injuries, trained recruits, and remained prepared for emergencies. But there was a difference now. The interactions she had with her fellow soldiers were no longer tinged with skepticism. They asked for her advice on medical techniques, leadership strategies, and how to remain calm under pressure. Even the youngest and most inexperienced soldiers looked up to her, understanding that true courage was not defined by rank or title but by action when it mattered most. The commander, whose life she had saved during the fire, continued to involve her in planning exercises and simulations. He treated her as a full partner, seeking her insight on scenarios where medical expertise intersected with tactical decisions. Sarah appreciated his trust, but more importantly, she valued the opportunity to continue proving that a medic could lead, make critical decisions, and inspire others. Her presence in these discussions was no longer questioned, it was expected. Over time, the culture of the unit began to change in ways subtle but profound. Mockery of medics had almost disappeared, replaced by respect for their training and contributions. Soldiers approached emergencies with a better understanding of teamwork, recognizing that each member of the team played a critical role. Sarah's actions during the fire had set a new standard, showing that courage is not about the person who shouts the loudest or wears the highest rank. It is about those willing to act, to take risks, and to protect others even when danger is real. Sarah herself reflected often on what had happened that day. She remembered the heat of the fire, the smoke stinging her eyes, the weight of the commander in her arms, and the sound of panicked voices all around her. But she also remembered the focus she had felt, the clarity of her actions, and the quiet sense of purpose that had carried her through. That clarity, she realized, was the result of years of preparation, training, and commitment to her role. She had trusted herself when others hesitated, and that trust had made all the difference. The story of Sarah's heroism did not stay confined to her own unit. Word of her bravery spread to other bases, inspiring medics, soldiers, and even commanders elsewhere. They shared her story as an example of what it meant to act decisively, courageously, and selflessly under pressure. It became a lesson in training programs, a reminder that true leadership is revealed not by words but by action, and that heroism often comes from unexpected places. For Sarah, the greatest reward was not the praise or recognition. It was seeing the change in the people around her. She watched young soldiers develop confidence in themselves, inspired by her example. She saw her colleagues treat one another with greater respect and understanding, learning to trust the skills and judgment of every team member. She witnessed a culture shifting from doubt and skepticism to cooperation, courage, and mutual respect. Her actions had created ripples far beyond the fire itself, shaping the environment for everyone in the unit. Sarah's personal growth was equally profound. She had faced the limits of fear, risk, and physical challenge, and had come through stronger, more confident, and more capable. She knew that emergencies could strike at any time, that life and death could hinge on a single decision. The fire had tested her not just physically, but mentally and emotionally, and she had discovered depths of courage she hadn't fully known existed. That knowledge stayed with her, giving her the strength to face future challenges with calmness and focus. As the years passed, Sarah became a mentor to new generations of medics and soldiers. She shared her story, not as a tale of personal glory, but as a lesson in courage, preparation, and integrity. She emphasized that skill alone was not enough. One must also trust in oneself, act decisively, and be willing to take responsibility when others hesitate. Her story inspired many, showing that anyone, regardless of role or title, could rise to extraordinary challenges. In the end, Sarah Thompson's journey had become a testament to resilience, bravery, and the power of action over assumption. She had faced fire, smoke, and fear, and in doing so had saved lives, earned respect, and changed perceptions. She had proven that being just a medic was never a limitation, but a unique position from which courage and leadership could shine. Her legacy was not measured in awards or commendations alone, but in the lives she touched, the lessons she taught, and the inspiration she gave to all who witnessed her bravery. Even as she continued her service, Sarah understood that the true impact of that day would endure. The soldiers who had once doubted her now carried a lesson she had demonstrated with every calm, decisive action. That courage is not defined by rank or role, but by the willingness to rise to the challenge when it matters most. Sarah had changed minds, saved lives, and set a standard that would inspire her unit and others for years to come. Her story, once defined by mockery, had become a legend of quiet heroism, courage, and the extraordinary power of action.